The supper table was set for two, and Ellen Langston had not moved her fork once in 15 minutes. She sat across from a man whose name she had only learned an hour ago, in a town that was not her destination, in a situation that felt so far removed from the careful, grief-muted life she had been constructing for herself over the past 8 months, that she could barely recognize the woman who had agreed to share this meal. The kerosene lamp between them threw amber light across the rough-hewn pine tabletop, and Clement Rourke had not spoken a single word since the innkeeper's wife had placed the bowls of beef stew before them and retreated with a knowing, slightly pitying smile. Ellen's hands were trembling, not because of the man. At least, that was what she told herself in those first brittle seconds. She was trembling because of the letter she had discovered that afternoon, tucked inside the lining of her traveling trunk, written in her late husband's handwriting and dated 3 weeks before his death. A letter she had never been meant to find. A letter that had cracked open every truth she thought she owned about her marriage, her grief, and the long westward journey she had undertaken to escape both. The letter had said, "If you are reading this, Ellen, then I did not have the courage to confess to your face. There are debts. There are people who will come for what I owe them. Do not stop in Harding. Do not stop anywhere between St. Louis and San Francisco. Do not trust anyone who claims to know me." And here she was, stranded in Harding, Nevada, because a flash flood had washed out the railroad tracks 3 miles east of town, and the next train would not come for 3 days. Clement Rourke lifted his spoon. He ate slowly, methodically, with the unhurried patience of a man who had spent years taking his meals in silence on open range. And Ellen watched him from beneath her lashes and felt something completely irrational stir inside her chest, something that frightened her almost as much as the letter. Because this man, this quiet, broad-shouldered cattleman with the sun-darkened skin and the careful gray eyes, was the only person in this entire stranger-filled town who had not asked her a single question she did not want to answer. And that, she realized with a cold, sinking clarity, might be the most dangerous thing about him. She set her fork down against the rim of the bowl. "Mr. Rourke," she said. He looked up. His eyes were patient, and they were watching her with a steadiness that reminded her of a mountain that has decided it will not be moved by wind. "I need to tell you something," Ellen said, and her voice was quieter than she intended. "And I need you to be honest with me in return." He nodded once, the way a man nods when he already suspects the conversation is going to be heavier than the meal. "Did my husband send you here?" The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear the fire crackling in the hearth across the room, and the distant sound of a horse somewhere out in the street, and the slow, measured breath of Clement Rourke as he lowered his spoon and looked at her with an expression she could not read at all. "I don't know your husband, Mrs. Langston," he said. His voice was low. It was the voice of a man who chose his words the way other men chose their footing on uncertain ground. "He's dead," Ellen said, "so I suppose the question was already strange." "It wasn't strange," Clement said. She looked at him, he looked at her. The lamp flame bent in a draft from the window. "Then what are you doing in Harding?" she asked. "Selling cattle," he said. "What are you doing in Harding?" "Trying to leave it," she said. And that was how their story truly began, though neither of them knew it yet. Ellen Langston had come west from Philadelphia 8 months after burying her husband, Thomas Langston, who had died of fever in the spring of 1882 at the age of 41. They had been married for 6 years, and she had believed those years to be honest ones, the ordinary kind of marriage built on practical affection and shared household, neither passionate nor unhappy, simply the life of a woman who had made a reasonable choice at 24 and had not spent much time questioning it. Thomas had been a man of business. He had dealt in land speculation, in railroad bonds, in the sort of financial transactions that respectable Philadelphia society found entirely acceptable and only occasionally inquired into with any real depth. He had been well-dressed, well-mannered, and well-liked at dinner parties. He had been a decent enough husband in the ways that counted in public and somewhat less attentive in the ways that did not show. When he died, Ellen had been 30 years old, childless, and unexpectedly composed in a way that her mother's friends found slightly unnerving. She had attended the funeral with dry eyes, not because she did not feel his absence, but because she had found, in the weeks of his illness, that she had been preparing for a solitude she had not previously admitted was already well established. She had sold the house. She had settled what she understood to be his debts. She had packed everything she intended to keep into a single large trunk and 2 smaller bags, purchased a train ticket to San Francisco, and told herself she was beginning again. She had not found the letter until she was already in Nevada. She stood now at the window of the small room the innkeeper had given her at the Harding Hotel, which was really just a 2-story wooden building with 7 sleeping rooms and a dining area that doubled as a saloon after 8 in the evening. The street outside was dark and still, the kind of stillness that small western towns produced at night, not peaceful exactly, but suspended, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The letter was on the bed behind her. She had read it 4 times. Each time, new pieces of it landed differently, like stones dropped into a deep well, the sound arriving after the fall. There are debts, not the manageable kind, the kind that Philadelphia lawyers could untangle with time and documentation. Thomas had written about a man named Garrett Sills, a name she did not recognize, and a sum of money that made her feel physically ill when she considered it in relation to everything she thought she understood about her finances. He had written about a partnership gone wrong in 1879, about money that had been diverted, about promises made to men who were not the kind of men who accepted broken promises with anything resembling patience. He had told her to go to San Francisco. He had given her the name of a man there, a lawyer named Marcus Webb, and written that Marcus would know what to do, that Ellen should hand him the letter and trust that arrangements had been made. He had also written in the last line, in the slightly uneven script of a man who was already feverish and already afraid, "I am sorry, Ellen. You deserved better than what I was." She had stood in this room for a long time after reading that last line. She was not sure what she felt. She was not sure if she was grieving or furious or simply exhausted by the discovery that the neat, manageable story she had built around her widowhood was not the true one. What she knew was that she was stranded in a town her husband had explicitly told her not to stop in, that she did not know who this Garrett Sills was or whether he was someone who might actually be looking for her, and that she was sharing a dining room with a man named Clement Rourke, whose quiet self-possession had, against all reasonable judgment, made her feel safer in the last 2 hours than she had felt in weeks. Which was either a comfort or a trap, and she genuinely could not tell which. She picked up the letter and folded it carefully and tucked it into the inner pocket of her traveling coat, which she hung on the hook beside the door, and then she sat down on the edge of the narrow bed and tried to think. She would need to be careful. She would need to be watchful. She would need to get through 3 days in a town she did not know, with very limited information about what kind of danger she might actually be in. And then she would need to reach San Francisco and find Marcus Webb and let someone who understood the full shape of Thomas's secrets help her understand what her life actually was. What she did not need, she told herself firmly, was to become further entangled with a quiet, gray-eyed cattleman who was already, after a single shared supper, occupying more space in her thoughts than any man had occupied in years. She was being foolish. She was probably frightened, and fear made people reach for things that felt solid, and Clement Rourke was undeniably solid in the way that certain people were, the way mountains were, the way old oak trees were, the way things are when they have been tested and have not broken. She told herself to go to sleep. She did not sleep for a very long time. In the morning, the town of Harding was loud with the particular chaos of a place that has been unexpectedly flooded with stranded travelers. The railroad agent, a thin, nervous man named Fletcher, had pinned a notice to the board outside the station house confirming what the rumors had said the night before. The eastbound and westbound tracks were both blocked, the eastbound by flood damage and the westbound by a rockslide that had apparently occurred independent of the flood and with spectacular timing. 3 days, the notice said, possibly 4, workers had been dispatched. Ellen read the notice twice and then walked back toward the hotel with a careful, measured step that she hoped did not communicate the particular quality of her anxiety. The street was busy. Men she did not recognize stood in small clusters, talking in the low, purposeful tones of people discussing logistics and inconvenience. 2 women with small children sat on a bench outside the mercantile, looking tired. A cattle drive's worth of dust was still settling from the edge of town where, she understood, Clement Rourke and his crew had brought in a herd the previous evening. She had almost made it back to the hotel door when she heard her name. "Mrs. Langston." She turned. Clement Rourke was crossing the street toward her. He was wearing the same dark coat he had worn at supper, his hat low against the morning sun, and he moved with the economical, unhurried stride of a man who has walked a great many miles and sees no particular reason to hurry any of them. "Good morning, Mr. Rourke," she said. "Morning." He stopped a respectful distance from her. "I heard they've confirmed 3 days, possibly more." "I read the notice," she said. "I wanted to let you know," he said, and then paused, looking at her in that steady, careful way he had, "that my outfit is camped at the north edge of town while we wait for the stock buyer to arrive. If you have any trouble or need anything, the camp is easy enough to find." Ellen looked at him. "Why would I need anything?" she said. It was not the most gracious response. She knew that even as the words came out. But she was standing in a town her dead husband had warned her against, holding a secret she could not share with a stranger, and Clement Rourke's quiet, unassuming offer of help was precisely the sort of thing that felt like it could be either entirely sincere or the opening move of something much more complicated. He did not flinch. "You're traveling alone," he said. "Town's crowded. I wasn't implying you couldn't manage." "I can manage," she said. "I know it," he said. And then, with a slight inclination of his head that was almost a bow, "Good morning, Mrs. Langston." He walked on. Ellen stood on the wooden sidewalk and watched him go and felt a flush of embarrassment that was tangled up with something else, something that was almost regret, though she could not have told anyone precisely what she was regretting. She went inside and asked the innkeeper's wife, a solid, cheerful woman named Dora Pell, if there was any way to send a telegraph from Harding. There was. The telegraph office was on the main street, 3 buildings down from the hotel. Ellen wrote out a message to Marcus Webb in San Francisco, careful and brief, giving her name, her location, and a single sentence. "Delayed in Harding 3 days. Have found correspondence of Thomas's you should know about. Will arrive as soon as possible." She paid for the telegram and walked back to the hotel and sat in the dining room with a cup of coffee and tried to feel steadier than she did. The morning passed. At noon, Dora Pell put out a cold lunch of bread and sliced ham and pickled vegetables, and Ellen ate alone at a corner table and watched the room fill up with stranded travelers and local men, and a couple of cowboys from Clement's outfit who came in tracking dust on their boots and spoke to each other in the low, good-natured half-sentences of men who have been working together long enough that full sentences feel redundant. She found herself listening for Clement's voice without meaning to. He did not come in at noon. In the early afternoon, she took her book out onto the small porch at the front of the hotel and tried to read, which was more successful than she expected, partly because the afternoon had quieted somewhat and partly because the novel was a genuinely gripping one, a story of ambition and betrayal in the drawing rooms of New York, which felt both very far away and oddly relevant. She was 3 chapters in when a shadow fell across the page. She looked up. A man she did not know was standing at the edge of the porch. He was not one of Clement's cowboys. He was perhaps 45, with a broad, flat face and pale eyes that were doing a very thorough job of looking at her without appearing to. "Mrs. Langston," he said, her stomach tight. "Yes, Tom Langston's widow. The use of her husband's first name, the casual, proprietorial Tom, sent a cold current through her. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, keeping her voice level. "Name's Cade Jeffers," the man said. "I ride for Mr. Garrett Sills." Ellen closed her book. There was a moment in which everything she had feared in the abstract became very specifically concrete and very specifically present, standing 4 feet away from her on a hotel porch in the Nevada afternoon sun. "I don't know anyone by that name," she said. It was not precisely a lie. She had not known the name until yesterday. "Your husband did," Jeffers said. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Mr. Sills wanted me to let you know that he's aware you're passing through and that he'd appreciate a conversation when you have a moment." "I am simply waiting for the train," Ellen said. "Of course you are," Jeffers said. "Mr. Sills understands that. He just wanted you to know he's in town. He took rooms at the other end of the street." He paused. "He's a patient man, generally speaking. But he does have certain business interests that he'd like to discuss with Tom's family, seeing as Tom left some things unresolved." "I am not in a position to discuss my husband's business affairs," Ellen said. "I have no knowledge of them." "Mr. Sills thought you might say that," Jeffers said. His pale eyes had not moved from her face. "He also thought you might want to think carefully about your situation before you decide how to handle the conversation. 3 days is a long time to be stuck in a small town, Mrs. Langston." He touched the brim of his hat. He walked away down the street. Ellen sat perfectly still for a long count of 10, and then she went inside and up to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and understood, with great clarity, that Thomas's letter had not been an exaggeration. She needed to think. She needed to think carefully and quickly about what she knew, what she did not know, and what her options were. She knew Thomas had owed money to Garrett Sills. The nature of the debt was unclear, but it was large enough that Sills had sent a man to find her, which meant he believed she had something he wanted, whether money or information or documentation that could be used to recover what Thomas had taken or borrowed or stolen. She did not know how dangerous Sills actually was, whether the threat was financial or physical, whether Thomas's letter to Marcus Webb represented a genuine plan for resolution or simply a dying man's desperate hope. Her options: wait 3 days, avoid Sills, telegraph Marcus Webb again with more specific information, and hope for some response before the train came. Or, alternatively, find someone in Harding who had enough of a presence and enough of a reputation that Sills would calculate twice before pressing her too hard. She sat for a long time with that thought. Then she put on her coat and walked north through the edge of town to the cattle camp. The camp was easy enough to find, as Clement had said. A string of horses picketed along a rope line, a fire in a ring of stones, bedrolls and saddles arranged with the practical efficiency of men who spent most of their lives outdoors. 3 cowboys were playing cards on a blanket. A 4th was tending the horses. A 5th, she realized as she got closer, was Clement Rourke, standing at the edge of the fire talking to a short, weathered Mexican vaquero named, she would later learn, Ignacio, who served as his trail boss. Clement saw her approaching and said something brief to Ignacio and walked out to meet her. His expression, when he reached her, was not surprised exactly. It was more like a man who has calculated a likelihood and found it confirmed. "Mrs. Langston," he said. "I apologize for coming out here," she said. "Don't," he said. She looked at him. The afternoon light was long and slanted, the kind of light that made the desert and the dry grass look almost golden, and Clement Rourke stood in it without particular vanity or self-consciousness, simply a man in his own skin, watching her with those careful gray eyes. "I think I may be in some difficulty," she said. He nodded, as if he had already known. "Tell me," he said. She had not planned to tell him very much. She had planned to offer a general, carefully edited version of the situation, enough to explain why she might benefit from not being entirely alone in Harding for 3 days, without revealing the full and rather humiliating truth about Thomas and his debts and his deceptions. What actually happened was that she told him everything. She told him about finding the letter. She told him about the debts and Garrett Sills and Marcus Webb. She told him about Cade Jeffers on the porch and the words that had sat inside them like a cold stone. Mr. Sills thought you might want to think carefully about your situation. She told him, and she watched his face while she did, and what she saw there was not judgment and was not pity, which were the two things she had feared most. What she saw was attention, pure and complete, the attention of a man who is listening not to formulate his response but simply to understand. When she finished, there was a brief silence. "This Sills," Clement said. "You know anything about him beyond what's in the letter?" "Nothing," she said. "I do," Clement said. Ellen stared. Clement's jaw moved slightly, the way it did, she was already learning, when he was working through something before speaking. "Garrett Sills runs cattle in this territory, or he claims to. His real business is money lending with the kind of interest rates that tend to end badly, and he has a particular reputation in 3 counties for how he handles people who can't pay." "How does he handle them?" Ellen asked. She already suspected she did not want the answer. "Badly," Clement said. "Never anything that can be proven in court, but men who owe Sills money have a habit of losing things. Property. Livestock. On one occasion, about 4 years ago, there was a man in Elko County whose barn burned down, and it was widely understood who had set the fire, and widely agreed that there was nothing to be done about it. The golden afternoon light suddenly felt considerably less pleasant. "He burned a man's barn," Ellen said. "That's the story," Clement said. "I don't know your husband's business, Mrs. Langston, and I'm not going to make judgments about a dead man. But I'll tell you this, if Sills sent someone to find you and tell you he's in town, that's not an introduction, that's a warning." "I know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why did you come to me?" It was a direct question. She respected it for being direct. It deserved a direct answer. "Because you're the only person in this town I have any reason to trust at all," she said. "And I'm not entirely certain I trust you, but you're what I have, and I'm trying to make the best decision I can with limited information." Clement looked at her for a long moment, and then something happened in his face that was very subtle, almost imperceptible, but that Ellen, who had spent 6 years studying a man's face for signals, caught clearly. It was not a smile exactly. It was the face of a man who has heard something unexpectedly honest and been moved by it despite himself. "All right," he said. "I'll tell you what I can do." What he could do, it turned out, was more than Ellen had thought to ask for. Clement Rourke was not. She learned over the next hour sitting at the edge of his camp while Ignacio made coffee and the cowboys played cards at a respectful distance, an ordinary cattleman. He was 36 years old, born in County Cork, Ireland, come to America at 12 with his family, grown up in Missouri, drifted west at 20 into Texas cattle country, and spent the last 16 years building a ranch and a reputation in the territory that gave his name a certain weight. He had also, she learned carefully through the things he said, and the things he did not say, a history with the kind of men Garrett Sills represented. Not because he had been such a man, because he had once been very nearly destroyed by one. "My first year running cattle on my own," he said, "I borrowed money from a man who I later found out was a partner in the same operation that Sills runs, different territory, same methods. I was 22, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I learned it at considerable cost." "What kind of cost?" Ellen asked. "I lost most of my first herd," he said. "Took me 4 years to recover. I swore I'd never be in a position to be used like that again, and I spent the next decade making very sure I wasn't." He looked at her steadily. "Which means I understand what Sills is doing with you a good deal better than he'd want me to." "What is he doing?" she said. "He's not sure what you have," Clement said. "If your husband left a letter, there may be documents, there may be promissory notes, there may be accounts that could embarrass Sills if they came to light, things that a lawyer in San Francisco could use. He knows you're stranded here for 3 days, which means he's going to use that time to find out. He'll push, but he'll be careful about how he pushes because he doesn't know yet what you know. So what do I do?" For now, Clement said, you don't go anywhere alone, and at supper tonight you sit at the same table as me and you let it be seen. Ellen looked at him. You're suggesting we appear to be in company with each other, socially. I'm suggesting, he said, with the careful precision of a man who understands implications, that a woman who is demonstrably not alone in this town is considerably less convenient to pressure than one who is. Sills is calculating. He won't risk a scene if there's no profit in it. And you don't mind, Ellen said, being used as a deterrent. There it was again, that almost not a smile. I'm offering, he said. That's different from being used. They ate supper together that evening at the same table in Dora Pell's dining room, and this time Clement was not silent. He talked. Slowly, carefully, in the measured way that was simply how he talked, but he talked, and Ellen found herself drawn into a conversation about things she had not discussed with another person in months, books she had read, places she had seen, the practical realities of rebuilding a life after loss, which Clement engaged with not as an abstraction, but as something he personally understood. His wife had died 3 years ago, he told her. Fever like Thomas, though it felt different to say that, nothing like Thomas, because what he described was clearly a marriage of genuine affection, of partnership, of the kind of daily tenderness that Ellen had never quite managed to construct in her own household. Her name had been Alice. He spoke of her simply and without apology for the grief, and Ellen listened and felt a complicated series of feelings move through her that she chose not to examine too closely at the time. She noticed Cade Jeffers at a table across the room. He noticed her noticing. He looked at Clement and then back at Ellen, and his expression recalculated. Clement, who had not appeared to look at Jeffers once, said quietly without turning his head, "He's still there." "Yes," Ellen said. "Don't change anything," Clement said. "Keep talking to me." She looked back at him. The lamplight between them was warm and steady. She said, "Tell me about your ranch," and he did. The Rourke Ranch was in the Humboldt Valley, which was, she noted, not impossibly far from where she was now, though it had taken him nearly 2 weeks on the trail to bring the herd to Harding for market. It was called, without particular poetry, the R-Bar, which was what ranchers in the territory called Clement Rourke's operation. 3,000 acres, a solid house built of stone and pine, a bunkhouse, corrals, a water source that was rare enough in Nevada to be the envy of several neighbors, and a herd that he had built from 100 head to nearly 800 over the course of 16 years. She asked him about the land, what it looked like, what kind of grass grew there, whether the winters were brutal. He described it with the quiet, precise love of a man describing something that is genuinely his, not in the proprietary sense, but in the sense of belonging, of being the place in the world where his bones understood the ground beneath them. Ellen found herself listening with a kind of aching attention that surprised her. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked, and then immediately regretted asking it because it was too personal and too direct and she had not meant to say it aloud. But Clement didn't flinch. "Yes," he said, "most days." She looked at him. He looked at her. Jeffers got up from his table across the room and left without speaking to either of them, and neither of them really noticed because they were looking at each other. The following morning, Ellen received a response to her telegram. It came from Marcus Webb's office and was written by a clerk, but the content was unmistakably from Webb himself. "Mrs. Langston, the matter you reference is known to me. Thomas made provision. Do not surrender any documents or correspondence. The situation can be resolved upon your arrival. You are in no legal jeopardy. I cannot speak to other kinds. Come quickly." She read the telegram 3 times and then went looking for Clement. She found him at the edge of the camp, saddling a horse with Ignacio, and she showed him the telegram without preamble, which was, she realized, an indication of how quickly she had come to trust this man more than she had trusted most people in her life. Clement read it once, handed it back, and said, "No legal jeopardy." "Yes," she said. "But he couldn't say the same about other kinds," Clement said. "No, He was quiet for a moment, watching Ignacio tighten the cinch on the horse with practiced ease. Then he said, "This morning 2 of Sills's men rode past the camp twice. I noticed them yesterday too. He's watching to see what I'm about." "Is that a problem?" Clement looked at her directly. "Not for me," he said. "For him, it might become one." She wanted very badly to ask him what that meant. She also understood that there was something in Clement Rourke's history and in his quiet self-assurance that made asking unnecessary. He had already decided something. She could see it in his face. The decision was made, and he was simply waiting for the right moment to execute it, the way a good rancher doesn't fight the weather but moves with it. "What are you thinking?" she said. "I'm thinking," he said, "that Sills is going to try to approach you today, directly, not through Jeffers. He'll want to take the measure of you himself, and he'll want to do it when you're alone." "Then I won't be alone," Ellen said. "No," Clement agreed. "You won't." They spent the morning together in a way that Ellen would have found remarkable under any other circumstances, and found remarkable anyway, despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them. He walked with her to the mercantile because she needed needles and thread, and a small amount of provisions to supplement the hotel meals, which were adequate but limited. He sat with her on the hotel porch while she wrote letters, not reading over her shoulder, simply present, occasionally saying something in the measured, unhurried way he had, about the town or the weather or some observation about the cattle trade that was, she discovered, consistently more interesting than it had any right to be. She found herself watching him when he was not looking at her. He had large, careful hands that moved with precision. He had a way of going still that was not tension but something else, a quality of attention directed outward rather than inward, as if he was always listening to things she could not quite hear. When something amused him, which was more often than she would have expected given his general quiet, the amusement traveled to his eyes before it reached his mouth, and the eyes had a warmth in them that she found herself looking for repeatedly, which was not something she had any business doing. She was a recent widow in a complicated situation, stranded in a hostile town, relying on the goodwill of a stranger for protection she had not expected to need. This was not a situation that was supposed to produce romantic feelings. She was 30 years old and she had been sensible her entire life, and she was going to continue being sensible. She was failing at this almost entirely by noon. Garrett Sills found her at 2 in the afternoon. He was not what she had imagined. She had imagined someone large and overtly threatening, someone whose danger was written plainly on the surface. What she got instead was a man of perhaps 50, medium height, well-dressed in a way that suggested money rather than cattle, with the smooth, precise manners of someone who had spent considerable time in drawing rooms and knew how to use courtesy as a weapon. He sat down across from her at the table on the porch without being invited, which was itself a statement. "Mrs. Langston," he said, "I'm Garrett Sills." Clement was inside the hotel, visible through the open door, speaking to Dora Pell about something, and he turned at Sills's voice with the unhurried movement of a man who has been expecting exactly this. "Mr. Sills," Ellen said. She kept her voice calm. "I won't take much of your time," Sills said. He had a southern accent, slightly flattened by years in the West. "I simply wanted to introduce myself and to say that I hope your stay in Harding, however inconvenient, has been comfortable." "It has been," Ellen said. "Good." He paused, turning his hat in his hands in a gesture that managed to be both casual and purposeful. "I was a business associate of your husband's, as I'm sure you may have heard. I had a great deal of respect for Thomas." Ellen said nothing. "He was a man who understood opportunity," Sills said. "Sometimes, with men who understand opportunity, certain arrangements become complicated. I don't hold any hard feelings about that." He smiled. "I simply have some outstanding business that Thomas and I never quite resolved, and I'm hoping that, as his widow, you might be in a position to assist with the resolution." "I'm not privy to my husband's business arrangements," Ellen said. "I'm afraid I can't help you." Sills's smile did not change. "Thomas was a thorough man," he said. "He kept very good records. I'd be surprised if there weren't documentation somewhere in his estate that might be useful to me. A matter of approximately $40,000, Mrs. Langston. You can understand why I'd want to pursue it. $40,000. Ellen understood now, very completely, the weight of what Thomas had carried into his death. She kept her face absolutely still. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't have anything that could help you." Clement stepped out onto the porch. He did not say anything immediately. He simply appeared at Ellen's right side and stood there, which changed the geometry of the conversation entirely, because Garrett Sills looked up at a man who was 4 inches taller and 20 years younger, and had, in his very posture, an absolute calm that was considerably more threatening than aggression. "Rourke," Sills said. "Sills," Clement said. They knew each other. Ellen had not known this and understood it immediately from the way the air between them shifted. "I wasn't aware Mrs. Langston was a friend of yours," Sills said. "She is," Clement said. Sills looked at Ellen, then back at Clement. Then back at Ellen, and in his recalculation she could see him processing something, reassessing his approach. "Well," he said, standing, "I hope the train delay hasn't been too much of an inconvenience." He touched his hat to Ellen. "Mrs. Langston, it was a pleasure. I hope we'll have opportunity to continue our conversation before you leave." He walked away down the street. Ellen let out a breath she had been holding for approximately 4 minutes. "You know him," she said. "We've had dealings," Clement said. He sat down in the chair Sills had vacated, which was not something he had done before, and looked at her steadily. 3 years ago, before Alice died, Sills tried to buy the R-Bar. When I said no, he tried a different approach. He went to the water board and made a claim that the creek running through my property belonged to Open Range. I spent 6 months and most of that year's profit in legal fees proving otherwise. "He tried to take your water," Ellen said. "He tried to take what gave the land value," Clement said, "which is what he does. He finds the pressure point and he pushes." "Your pressure point is the water," Ellen said. "Mine is apparently $40,000 I don't have." "What does the lawyer in San Francisco know?" Clement asked. "Thomas made provision," Ellen said. "That's all Webb said. I don't know what that means. But he said I'm not in legal jeopardy, which suggests Thomas did something to protect me, or at least to protect himself, and some of that protection extends to me." Clement nodded slowly. "If Thomas documented the arrangement with Sills, all of it, how the money moved, what Sills knew and agreed to, that's the kind of thing that makes a man like Sills very reluctant to press too hard. Because pressing hard brings scrutiny, and scrutiny is the thing he can least afford." "You think that's what Thomas did?" Ellen said. "I think that's what Marcus Webb is sitting on in San Francisco," Clement said. Ellen was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street where Sills had disappeared. Then she looked at Clement. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Not the version of the question she had asked before when she was frightened and uncertain. A different version coming from somewhere quieter and more direct. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with those steady gray eyes. "I've been trying to work that out myself," he said honestly. And then, because that was the kind of answer that could not simply be left in the air between two people who were already sitting very close together on a hotel porch in the Nevada afternoon, neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was the comfortable kind, which Ellen had not experienced in longer than she could easily remember. That evening it rained, which was rare enough in Nevada in September to feel like something the town had not prepared for. The street turned to mud, and the stranded travelers retreated to Dora Pell's dining room, which became crowded and warm and smelled of wet wool and stew and wood smoke. Ellen and Clement sat at their corner table, and this time the supper was long. They ate and they talked, and around them the noise and warmth of the room receded into something that felt almost like a private space. He told her about Ireland, not as a distant, half-remembered thing, but as a place he still carried, the smell of the sea on rainy days, the way his mother had made soda bread, the sound of his father's laugh, which had been, he said, a great and unexpected laugh for a quiet man. Ellen told him about Philadelphia. About the years of her childhood in a house full of books and a father who had been a professor of natural history at the university and a mother who had played piano badly and knitted well and told her daughters, of which Ellen was the second, that beauty was a poor investment and brains were eternal. "Your mother sounds like a practical woman," Clement said. "She was," Ellen said. "She approved of Thomas. She said he was reliable." "Was he?" Ellen looked at him. She thought about the letter. About 6 years of ordinary, contained marriage and the secret that had lived inside it. "In some ways," she said carefully, "he was consistent, he was present, he was not unkind." "But," Clement said. But Ellen agreed. "He was not honest. I think looking back that I knew that in a way I chose not to examine, I made it more comfortable not to look closely." "People do that," Clement said. "It's not a condemnation of you." "No," she said. "It's just a fact I have to make peace with." He looked at her for a moment with something in his face that was open and warm and a little raw, the face of a man who understands making peace with facts about yourself. "Alice," he said. "She was honest to a fault. It was one of the things I loved most about her. She never said a kind thing she didn't mean, and she said a great many kind things. I relied on it more than I knew while she was alive." He paused. "After she was gone, I found it very hard to know what to believe for a while. When you lose the person who tells you the truth, the world gets very uncertain." Ellen reached across the table and touched his hand. It happened quickly, the instinct of a person who recognizes grief and responds to it before thinking, and then her hand was on his on the table, and she was fully aware of it and not withdrawing. He turned his hand palm upward beneath hers and held it. For a long moment they both looked at their joined hands on the rough pine table, and then they looked at each other, and neither of them spoke, because everything that needed to be said had just been said in the gesture, in the way he had turned his hand, and in the way she had not moved away. The rain fell harder on the roof. Someone across the room laughed at something. Clement said quietly, "Mrs. Langston." "Ellen," she said. He looked at her. "Ellen." She could feel the warmth of his hand all the way up her arm and into her chest, and it was not the warmth of danger or of panic. It was the warmth of something safe and real and entirely unexpected, and it frightened her, and it also felt, in a way she had no good framework for, like the most honest moment she had sat inside in 6 years. She did not let go of his hand. He did not let go of hers. They sat that way for a while, and the supper went cold, and neither of them cared. The second day in Harding was different. Not in its external shape, which was much like the first. Crowded town, displaced travelers, Sills and Jeffers visible in their comings and goings in the way that men who want to be noticed as a reminder allow themselves to be visible. But inwardly, for Ellen, everything had shifted on its axis. She woke in the narrow hotel bed and lay still in the gray early morning, listening to the town come to life outside the window. And what she felt was not fear, which had been the primary content of her first waking in Harding. What she felt was something complicated and warm and sharp at the edges, the feeling of a woman who has been touched kindly for the first time in longer than she wants to calculate. She got up and dressed and went downstairs and found Clement already there, at their table, with 2 cups of coffee. He looked up when she came in. The morning light from the window hit the side of his face, and he looked, in that unguarded early moment, something like the man he must have been when he was younger, before the losses and the work had built that particular quality of steadiness over him. "Morning," he said. "You were here early," she said, sitting down. "I don't sleep past 5 as a rule," he said. "Old habit. Ranch habits," she said. "Ranch habits," he agreed and pushed one of the coffee cups toward her. She wrapped her hands around it. They were quiet together for a few minutes in the easy, unforced way of people who have discovered they can share silence without filling it anxiously. "I've been thinking," she said. "Tell me," he said. "About Sills," she said. "I don't think he's going to push harder before I leave, given that you're here, but I'm worried about what happens after. When I leave on the train, you're not going to San Francisco." "No," he said. "And Marcus Webb may be able to handle the legal side, but if Sills has men in San Francisco, or if he can delay things through other means—" "Ellen," Clement said. She looked at him. Webb is a lawyer in San Francisco, Clement said. If he has Thomas's documentation, and if it's what I think it is, then Sills's leverage over you is the uncertainty. Once you're in San Francisco and Webb has reviewed everything and you understand what you actually have, the leverage is gone. Sills is a bully. Bullies operate in shadows. They don't like the light. You sound very certain, she said. I'm not certain of everything, he said, looking at her in a way that made it clear he was talking about more than Garrett Sills. But I'm certain of some things. She held his gaze. What things? He took a slow breath. That you're not in the kind of danger you feared when you came to my camp, that you're going to reach San Francisco, that Webb is going to resolve the legal situation. He paused. That I don't want you to leave. The room felt very still. Ellen put down her coffee cup carefully. Clement, she said, and the use of his first name, which she had not used aloud before, did something visibly to his face, something he did not entirely control. I know, he said. We've known each other for 2 days, she said. I know that too, he said. That's not very long, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the town was fully awake now, noise drifting in through the window, horses and voices and the distant ring of the blacksmith. The ordinary world going about its ordinary business. My whole life, she said slowly, I have made careful decisions, reasonable decisions. I married a reasonable man and lived a reasonable life. And when it turned out to be built on secrets I couldn't see, I packed everything I owned and decided to start again in a reasonable, orderly fashion. And then your train stopped in Harding, Clement said. And then my train stopped in Harding, she said. And I found a letter I wasn't meant to find, and a man was sent to threaten me, and I walked out to a cattle camp and asked a stranger for help, which was the least reasonable thing I have done in years. And, she looked at him. Her heart was doing something very complicated in her chest. And it turned out to be the best decision I've made in longer than I can remember, she said. He reached across the table. She gave him her hand. They sat like that in the morning light, while the town moved around them, and it was the most natural thing Ellen could imagine, which was itself extraordinary. The day passed in the particular golden way of days that are being memorized while they happen. He took her riding in the afternoon, with Ignacio's blessing and 2 of the cowboys riding at a distance that was both protective and discreet, out into the scrub desert north of town, where the land opened up into the wide, sage-scented emptiness that was the Nevada high desert and was nothing like Philadelphia, and was nothing she had ever wanted and was, she found, extraordinarily beautiful. She rode a dun mare from Clement's remuda, a quiet, reliable animal with a smooth gait, and Clement rode beside her on a dark bay he called Sherman, and they rode at an easy pace that let them talk. He told her about his first year in Texas, which had been brutal and formative in the way that first years of difficult things are, all wrong decisions and expensive lessons, and the gradual, painful construction of competence. He told her about the year he met Alice, who had been a school teacher in the town nearest his ranch, a woman of sharp intelligence and quiet humor who had looked at this large, awkward Irish cattleman with his limited social graces and his evident passion for the land, and decided with a practicality that charmed him that he was worth investing in. She taught me to read properly, he said. I could read before, but not the way she meant. She gave me books and she argued with me about them, and I fell in love with her while we were arguing about a novel I thought was dreadful and she thought was the most important thing written in a decade. Which novel? Ellen asked. He glanced at her with something amused. George Eliot, Middlemarch. Ellen let out a laugh, genuine and sudden, the first real laugh she'd had in what felt like months. You thought Middlemarch was dreadful. I was 33 and I had been living outdoors for most of my adult life, he said with patient dignity. I came around to it. You'd better have, she said. He smiled. A full smile, the kind that changed his whole face, and Ellen felt it move through her like the first warm day after a long winter. What did you tell her? She asked. When you came around to it. I told her she was right, he said. She seemed to find this satisfying. I imagine she did, Ellen said. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and the sun moved through the sky and the sage smelled sharp and clean after the previous night's rain. And Ellen Langston thought about the life she had been building in her imagination. The San Francisco life, the fresh start life, the careful, orderly, solitary reconstruction of a person. And she thought about how it had already started to look different in her mind than it had looked a week ago. Not smaller, different, less clear. Less like a plan and more like an opening. On the way back into town, with the sun going orange behind the western hills, Clement said, "When you get to San Francisco, what is it that you're hoping for?" She thought about it honestly. "I've been saying I'm beginning again," she said. "That I want something new and open and of my own choosing. I've been thinking about that mostly in terms of what I'm leaving behind." "And now," he said. She looked at him, this man she had known for 2 days, who had steady gray eyes and large capable hands in a ranch in the Humboldt Valley, and the particular quality of still, attentive warmth that she had been missing her entire adult life without having a name for it. "Now I'm starting to think about it in terms of what I might go toward," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly, and something in his face was so open and careful and hopeful that she had to look away at the horizon before it undid her completely. That evening, Cade Jeffers found Clement in the street. Ellen was not present for what was said. She heard about it afterward from one of Clement's cowboys, a cheerful young man named Danny who seemed to consider this the most exciting event of the trip. Jeffers had come with 2 of Sills's other men, and had suggested, in terms that were not quite a threat but were certainly adjacent to one, that Clement ought to reconsider his involvement in Mrs. Langston's affairs. Clement had listened to this in his characteristic silence, and then he had said, in a voice that Danny described as very quiet and very clear, "Tell Mr. Sills that I know about the water claim in Elko County. I know about the fire at Jacob Wheeler's place in 1879. I know about the arrangement he had with a man named Langston, and I know what Langston documented before he died. And I know that a man who pushes a widow with that kind of documentation on her side is a man whose inviting scrutiny he cannot afford." Jeffers had left. Ellen listened to this account with her hands in her lap and felt something move through her that was warm and fierce and slightly overwhelming. Found Clement at the camp, and she walked up to him in the firelight and said, "You told him you know what Thomas documented." "I did," Clement said. "You don't know what Thomas documented," she said. "Not specifically." "No," he said, "but Sills doesn't know that I don't know." She looked at him, he looked at her. The fire was warm and the night sky above Nevada was enormous and full of stars. "That was a risk," she said. "A calculated one," he said. "You did that for me," she said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her in the firelight with an expression she was learning to read, which was the expression of a man who is feeling something considerable and choosing his words with proportionate care. "Ellen," he said. "Yes," she said. "I need to say something," he said. "Say it," she said. He took a slow breath. "I'm not a man who moves quickly in most things," he said. "I tend toward patience and I tend toward certainty before I act. But I am also a man who lost 3 years of his life being so careful and so patient, and so convinced that what he felt was not possible that he nearly missed the thing he wanted most." She was very still. "Alice," he said. "I waited 2 years to tell her how I felt. 2 years I could have had with her and I didn't because I was being careful. I have spent 3 years since she died knowing that the careful years were ones I cannot get back." He looked at her steadily. "I don't want to make the same mistake twice." Ellen felt her heart in her throat. "What are you saying?" she said. "I'm saying," he said, "that I have no right to ask anything of you. You've been a widow for 8 months. You're in the middle of a situation I've only partially helped with. You're on your way to a city I've never been to begin a life you planned before you knew me." "And," she said, "and I am asking anyway," he said. "Because I think that's more honest than being careful." She stepped closer to him. The firelight moved over his face, and he looked at her with the steady, open, slightly braced expression of a man who has said the true thing and is prepared for any answer. "You're asking," she said quietly, "if there is any possibility." "Yes," he said. She put her hand against his chest, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric of his shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "There is more than a possibility," she said. And Clement Rourke, who was not a man who moved quickly, put his arms around Ellen Langston and held her with the careful, strong gentleness of a man who knows the value of what he is holding. And she pressed her face against his shoulder and felt something release in her that had been wound tight for so long she had forgotten it was wound. They stood like that by the fire while the stars moved overhead and the Nevada night held them, and it was, Ellen thought, the most completely real moment she had experienced in as long as she could remember. The third day in Harding was the last one. Ellen woke knowing the train would come in the afternoon and felt a sharp, clean sensation in her chest that was part anticipation and part grief, which seemed contradictory until she understood that she was grieving this particular suspended time, this strange, accidental, perfectly impossible thing that had happened in a stopped town while the rest of the world waited for the tracks to be cleared. She went downstairs. He was at the table, 2 coffee cups. She sat down. He looked at her. "Last day," she said. "Yes," he said. They drank their coffee. "I need to reach San Francisco," she said. "I need to see Marcus Webb and understand what Thomas's documentation actually contains and what my situation actually is." "I know," he said. "And then," she said, looking at him directly, "I need to know what my life can actually be. Not the life I planned necessarily, but what it actually can be." He held her gaze. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that San Francisco was a destination I chose because it was far away and because Thomas had given me a name there. It was always a means, not an end." "And the Humboldt Valley," he said. She let herself smile, really smile, the kind that she couldn't entirely control. "Is considerably closer," she said. Something in his face opened like a door. "I have a stone house," he said, "and a water source and 800 cattle. I've heard," she said. "It's a working ranch," he said. "It's not Philadelphia." "Good," she said. He reached across the table and took her hand, and she turned hers to hold his properly, fingers interlaced. "Go to San Francisco," he said. "Do what needs to be done. See this Webb and make sure you're fully free of whatever Thomas's debts actually are." "And then," she said. "And then come back," he said. "If you want to." "I want to," she said. They looked at each other across the table in the morning light with the full understanding of people who are making a real promise, not an easy one, not an impulsive one, but a deliberate one built in 3 days of genuine knowing. "I will write to you," she said. "I'll write back," he said. "I'm a better writer than I look," she laughed. "I know," she said. "You read Middlemark." "Eventually," he said. The morning moved toward noon, and noon toward afternoon, with a particular quality of bright, slow sweetness that Ellen stored away carefully in her memory. They walked the length of the main street and back, talking about everything and nothing. He bought her a book at the Mercantile, a new one, a novel he said he'd been meaning to read, which she took as a declaration. She gave him a small daguerreotype of herself from her trunk, taken in Philadelphia 2 years ago, with her hair up and her expression composed and her eyes very direct. He looked at it for a long moment, then put it carefully in the inside pocket of his coat. She felt this gesture in a way that had no adequate language. Sills was nowhere to be seen on their last morning, which was either because Clement's words had achieved their purpose or because Sills had decided to recalculate his strategy. Either way, his absence was a relief, though Ellen no longer felt the concentrated, close fear she had felt on the first day. Something had changed in her relationship to the danger. She had faced it. She had not faced it alone, and she understood its shape well enough to handle it. At 2 in the afternoon, the sound of a train whistle came faintly from the east. Ellen stood at the window of her hotel room, her trunk packed and closed, her 2 smaller bags buckled and ready, and she pressed her forehead for one moment against the cool glass of the window and breathed. 3 days ago she had arrived in this town believing herself to be in a manageable situation and discovered the ground entirely different from what she had been standing on. She had been threatened and frightened and shaken down to the foundation of the story she told about herself. And out of that, with a logic that she could not have predicted or planned, she had walked into something that felt like the truest beginning she had ever been offered. She picked up her bags and went downstairs. Clement was in the lobby, hat in hand, talking to Dora Pell, who was regarding him with the warm, appraising look of a woman who has watched something unfold in her dining room and approved of it entirely. He took Ellen's larger bag from her without asking. They walked to the station together. The train was coming in slowly, its whistle cutting through the bright afternoon, steam and noise, and the organized chaos of a platform full of people who had been waiting for 3 days and were very ready to go. Ellen stood on the platform with her trunk checked and her bags at her feet and Clement beside her, and she looked at him and felt the full, complicated weight of what the next weeks were going to be. "Write to me," she said. "I said I would," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm saying it again because I want to hear you say it again." He looked at her with those steady gray eyes in the afternoon light, with the noise and steam and motion of the departing world all around them. "I will write to you, Ellen," he said. "Every week if you'll have it." "Every week," she said. He took her hand and held it. The conductor called the boarding. She looked at Clement Rourke, this man she had known for 3 days, this man who had walked out of a cattle camp and into her crisis and her evenings and her hands and her heart, and she thought, "This is the truest thing that has happened to me, and I will not waste it by being careful." She stepped up onto the step of the train car and turned and looked down at him. "The Humboldt Valley," she said. "When you're ready," he said. "I'll be ready," she said. The train moved. He did not look away until the platform was gone. San Francisco was enormous and gray and beautiful in the way of cities that have grown faster than anyone expected. All new buildings and old fog, and the smell of the bay on everything. Ellen arrived in the evening and took rooms at a respectable hotel on Powell Street and sent a message to Marcus Webb's office before she had even unpacked. Webb came to her the following morning. He was a small, precise man in his 60s, with the manner of someone who has handled a great many complicated things and retained his equanimity through all of them. He sat across from her in the hotel parlor, and she gave him Thomas's letter, and he read it without expression and then set it on the table between them and looked at her. "Thomas told you very little," he said. "He told me enough to be frightened," she said. "The fright was understandable," Webb said. "The situation is more straightforward than you may imagine." He opened his case and produced a folder of documents. "Your husband was not, as you may have suspected, an entirely innocent party in his dealings with Garrett Sills. They were partners in a scheme that involved the fraudulent sale of railroad bonds. When Thomas understood the full nature of what Sills intended, he withdrew and he documented everything." "He documented it," Ellen said. "He documented it. He deposited the documentation with me, and he arranged a legal instrument that functionally ensures that if any party attempts to claim damages from his estate or from you as his widow, the full documentation becomes public, which would result in Sills and at least 2 of his associates facing federal charges." Webb looked at her with quiet precision. "In short, Sills cannot touch you without destroying himself. He knows this, or he will know it the moment I communicate with his legal representative, which I will do today." Ellen sat with this for a moment. Thomas had known. Thomas had been scared and guilty and dying, and he had spent the last months of his life building a wall to protect her from the consequences of his own mistakes, and he had not been brave enough to tell her about it while he was alive, but he had done it. She felt something shift in her grief, not disappear, but change shape into something that could coexist more comfortably with the rest of what she knew about him. "I am not in danger," she said. "You are entirely free," Webb said. "Thomas's estate, once his known debts are properly settled, leaves you approximately $6,000 in clear assets. Not a fortune, but sufficient for a woman with practical expectations. $6,000 and a clean, open future." Ellen Langston sat in a San Francisco hotel parlor in the fog-gray morning and felt, for the first time in years, entirely her own. She wrote to Clement that afternoon. She wrote to him the way she had always wanted to write to someone, fully and honestly, without editing herself down to the version she thought was appropriate. She told him about Webb and the documentation and the instrument Thomas had built. She told him she was free of all of it. She told him San Francisco was lovely and enormous and full of interesting things, and that she missed the smell of sage and the sound of his voice in a way she had not expected and was not going to apologize for. She told him she would be in San Francisco for perhaps 6 weeks, long enough to settle Thomas's estate fully and put her affairs in order. And then she was coming back to Nevada. She asked him to meet her in the town of Winnemucca, which was the nearest significant rail stop to the Humboldt Valley. She sent the letter and felt something settle in her chest like a stone finding the bottom of a clear stream. His reply came in 9 days, which she considered in the context of how slowly mail moved in the Nevada Territory and found entirely acceptable. He wrote the way he spoke, measured and precise, and with unexpected warmth moving through it like a current beneath the surface. He told her about the ranch in the days since Harding. The cattle sale had gone well. Ignacio was improving the north fence line. There had been an early frost that concerned him for the winter pasture, but he thought it would be manageable. He told her he had read the novel she had given him, and he thought it was quite good, and that they should argue about it when she arrived. He told her he was going to Winnemucca on the 2nd Saturday of October, and he would wait for her at the station. He told her in the last line, in the unhurried, careful handwriting of a man choosing every word, "I think about the firelight and the stars and the way you said my name for the first time. I am not a man who is accustomed to counting days. I am counting them now." Ellen read that last line 3 times and then pressed the letter to her chest and stood at her window looking out at San Francisco Bay with the feeling of someone who has been given a gift they did not know they had been waiting for. She wrote back the same afternoon. The weeks in San Francisco were productive and forward-facing in a way that surprised her with their lightness. She settled Thomas's estate with Marcus Webb's guidance, and the process of doing so was clarifying, the formal separation of what had been his from what was now hers, the transformation of widow back into simply a woman with a future. She explored the city. She read widely, as she always had. She wrote to her mother in Philadelphia and to her sister Ruth, and in those letters she mentioned, carefully, a man she had met while delayed in Harding, Nevada, a cattleman, a steady and decent man, and the letters she received in response were curious and cautiously encouraging and entirely insufficiently patient with the details she was choosing to withhold. She bought new clothes. Not the severe, grief-appropriate clothes she had been wearing since Thomas died, but practical, well-made things in colors she liked. A deep blue skirt, a green woolen jacket, a hat that her sister would have considered too plain, and her mother would have approved of for exactly that reason. She thought about the Arbar Ranch in the Humboldt Valley with a frequency and specificity that she recognized as the mental habit of someone who is already building a life in a place they have not yet seen. She thought about stone walls and a water source and 800 cattle and a man who read Middlemark and counted the days. On the 1st day of October, she packed her trunk. The train to Winnemucca took most of a long day, moving east through the Sacramento Valley, and then up into the Sierra Nevada and down through the high desert, the landscape opening and flattening into the great wide emptiness that she had first seen through a train window 8 months ago, and found alien and now found beautiful in a way that felt personal, as if it had been waiting for her to understand it. She arrived in Winnemucca on a Saturday afternoon, with the light going long and amber over the desert, stepping down from the train car onto a wooden platform in a town that was larger and busier than Harding, but had the same quality of practical, unadorned Western life. She looked along the platform. He was there. He was standing at the far end of the platform in the afternoon light, his hat in his hand, watching the train with those steady gray eyes, and when he saw her he went very still for one moment, The way a man goes still when the thing he has been waiting for actually arrives, and he takes a second to understand that it is real. She walked toward him. He walked toward her. They met in the middle of the platform, and he looked at her, taking her in with the careful, complete attention that was simply how he looked at things, and she looked at him and felt the 6 weeks of distance collapse into nothing. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she said. "I know," he said. "I wasn't entirely certain." "I know you weren't," she said. "That's why I'm saying it twice." He smiled. Not the almost smile, not the slight warming of the eyes, the full, transforming smile, and it was even better than she remembered. He took her hand. She gave it. "Come on," he said. "I have a wagon." The drive to the Arbar Ranch took 3 hours through the desert evening, and they talked the entire way, laughing sometimes, serious sometimes, comfortable in all of it. And the stars came out over Nevada one by one and then all at once. And Ellen Langston rode into the Humboldt Valley beside Clement Rourke in the dark with the smell of sage everywhere and the sound of the horses and the wide, immeasurable sky. And she felt something so full and clean it almost hurt. The ranch house was exactly as he had described it. Stone walls, a solid wide porch, a row of cottonwood trees along the water course, the shapes of the corrals and the bunkhouse dark against the darker sky. A lamp burned in the window. He helped her down from the wagon and stood close. "What do you think?" he said. She looked at the house, at the land, at the stars, at him. "I think," she said, "that it looks like home." He looked at her for a long moment. "It does," he said. They went inside, and Dora, the ranch's housekeeper, had left supper on the stove and a fire in the fireplace and had made herself scarce with the diplomatic efficiency of someone who understood the situation perfectly. They ate together at the kitchen table, and it was like Harding, and it was nothing like Harding, because in Harding they had been 2 strangers suspended in emergency, and now they were 2 people who had chosen each other with full information and full will, and the supper tasted of that. After supper, by the fire, he said, "I have to ask you something properly." She looked at him. He was sitting forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, turned toward her with the open, slightly braced expression she knew by now, the expression of a man who has made a decision and is executing it. "I'm not going to be careless about this," he said. "You've been in San Francisco for 6 weeks and you've had time to think, and I want you to know that I understand if this is still too new, if you want more time, if you want to live in town for a year before making any decision." "Clement," she said. "I'm not finished," he said. "I know," she said. "Go ahead." He took a breath. "I love you," he said, simply, directly, with the straightforward honesty of a man who has already lost too much time to carefully managed feelings. "I know it's fast. I know it started in strange circumstances, but I have thought about nothing else for 6 weeks, and I've been in enough of the world to know what this is." The fire crackled between them. "I want to marry you, Ellen," he said. "Not as an arrangement or a practical consideration, because I love you and I want you here and I want to build the rest of my life with you." She was quiet for one long moment, not because she was uncertain, but because the fullness of what he was offering required a breath to hold properly. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes, yes," she said. "I will marry you, Clement Rourke." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and then he stood and she stood, and he took her face in his hands with extraordinary gentleness and kissed her, and she kissed him back with everything she had been keeping carefully and patiently and honestly for 6 weeks and considerably longer. They married in Winnemucca on a Tuesday in November, at the church on the main street, with Ignacio as Clement's witness and a woman named Catherine Briggs, who was the wife of the local land agent and who had met Ellen at the milliner's shop the previous week and taken an immediate liking to her, as Ellen's. It was a simple ceremony, without great ceremony and without the careful social machinery of a Philadelphia wedding. And it was, Ellen thought, standing in the plain white church with the afternoon sun coming through the windows and Clement Rourke looking at her with those gray eyes full of everything he did not say very much aloud, exactly the wedding she had not known she wanted. They rode home to the Arbar in the late afternoon, and the valley was golden and the cottonwoods were yellow with autumn, and it was, by any measure, enough. It was more than enough. The winter was a good one, in the way that Nevada winters can be. Hard in the practical sense, cold and snowy in the mountains and dry and sharp on the flats, demanding and satisfying in the way that hard work at something meaningful is always satisfying. Ellen learned the ranch the way she had always learned things, with attention and questions and the willingness to be wrong while learning. She learned to manage the household with the particular requirements of a working ranch, cooking for Clement and herself and the bunkhouse crew, keeping the accounts in a ledger she reorganized with the systematic precision of someone who had been raised in a house full of books and knew how to build a system. She learned to ride properly, not the careful sidestep of a Philadelphia lady, but the practical, purposeful riding of someone who needs to cover ground. And Clement taught her with the patient, methodical attention he brought to everything. She wrote to her mother and her sister Ruth. She described the ranch in detail, the stone walls and the watercourse and the cottonwoods and the enormous sky, and she described Clement carefully and warmly, and the letter she received in return from her mother, which was 2 pages long and precise in all the ways her mother was precise, ended with, "He sounds like a man who knows what he has when he has it. That is the rarest kind. I am glad for you, Ellen." Ruth's letter was somewhat less restrained and considerably more delighted, and included an implication that she was very much hoping to visit. In the spring, Ellen planted a kitchen garden along the south side of the house in the sheltered corner, where the stone walls retained warmth, and Clement built her raised beds from leftover lumber with the focused, methodical carpentry he brought to tasks he cared about, which was most tasks. The garden became, over that first spring and summer, an astonishing thing, because the soil in the valley was good and the water source made irrigation manageable, and Ellen discovered that she had inherited some of her father's passion for growing things, a combination of patience and observation, and the particular satisfaction of watching something living respond to care. Clement would come in from the range in the evenings and find her in the garden and would stand watching her for a moment before she heard him, and she would look up and see his face in the last light and think, "This is the thing I was walking toward without knowing it." In the summer, a letter arrived from Marcus Webb's office in San Francisco. Garrett Sills had been named in a federal investigation related to fraudulent bond transactions in Nevada and California. The documentation Thomas had left with Webb had been among the materials submitted to the federal attorney's office. Sills was expected to face charges in the fall. Ellen read this letter on the porch in the morning light and felt something final settle. Thomas had built the wall he promised. It had held. She folded the letter and put it away in the box she kept in the desk where she kept the important documents, the deed and the accounts and the letter from her mother, and then she went out to the garden, and when Clement came in at noon she showed it to him, and he read it and nodded once, and then he looked at her. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she said. He pulled her close and held her there in the kitchen doorway with the noon sun coming in and the smell of the garden on the air, and it was the particular completeness of something finished, something released, some last shadow of the old life gone from hers. By autumn, Ellen was expecting their first child. She told Clement on a September evening by the fire, the same fire they had sat by on her first night at the R-Bar, and his face did something she had not seen before, something completely unguarded and almost undone, and then he pulled her to him with a careful, gentle strength and said, against her hair, "Ellen." "I know," she said. He pulled back and looked at her, and his eyes were full. "Are you well?" he said. "I'm very well," she said. He looked at her for a long time with the full, steady, open face of a man who is entirely present in a moment of his life. "I keep thinking," he said, "about Harding, about that flooded track." "The most inconvenient thing that ever happened to me," she said. "Yes," he said. "Me too," she smiled. He smiled. Outside the window, the stars were coming out over Nevada, one by one and then all at once, the way they always did, vast and permanent and entirely indifferent to any individual human story, and yet somehow on nights like this, feeling like something different, like witness. Their son was born in April of 1884. He was delivered in the stone house by Dr. Raymond Howell, who came from Winnemucca on the 6th day of the month, and the labor was long and ultimately safe. And when it was done, Clement sat on the edge of the bed with Ellen's hand in both of his, and the baby in the crook of her other arm, and looked at them both with an expression that had no category, except perhaps the one that has no name. They named him Patrick James Rourke. Patrick for Clement's father, James for Ellen's. He was, from his first hours, a serious, dark-eyed baby who looked at the world with an attention that Clement said, with satisfaction, was clearly Ellen's, and that Ellen said, looking at her son's steady, contemplative gaze, was clearly his father's. Patrick grew into a steady, curious, somewhat solemn child who loved the horses with a passion that Clement recognized and Ellen indulged, and who, by the age of 3, could name every animal in the remuda and had strong and vocal opinions about the relative merits of various ranching decisions. The R-bar grew. By 1885, the herd had reached 1,100 head. Clement expanded the north pasture, and Ignacio, who had been with him for 8 years by then, took on greater responsibility for the day-to-day operations with a quiet competence that freed Clement for the bigger decisions. Ruth Langston came to visit in the summer of 1885 and stayed for 3 months, which was longer than planned and suited everyone. She was quick and talkative and funny in the way Ellen was not, and she was completely taken by both Clement, whom she described in a letter to their mother as alarmingly admirable and very good with a difficult question, and Patrick, who was by then 14 months old and deeply focused on the project of learning to walk. The autumn of 1885 brought another pregnancy, and in June of 1886 they welcomed a daughter, named Alice Ruth Rourke, Alice for the woman Clement had loved and lost, Ruth for Ellen's sister. She was a loud, golden-haired, absolutely forceful infant from her first breath, and Patrick regarded her with the profound, slightly baffled respect of an older sibling confronting a new power. Ellen watched her daughter and thought about names and what it meant to carry one forward, the tenderness of it, the way Clement had suggested Alice not with grief but with the gentle acknowledgement that love doesn't end, it expands, and the woman who had taught him to read Middlemark deserved to be remembered in the stone house with the cottonwood trees. She had wept when he suggested it, which had startled him. Good tears, she had said, and he had understood. Years passed in the particular way of good years, full and marked and forward-moving. The ranch grew. The children grew. Ellen's garden spread from its original corner to cover most of the south-facing wall of the house, and she became known in the valley for the quality of her kitchen garden, and also for the small school she organized in 1887 in the ranch's second outbuilding, which served 6 children from the valley's scattered homesteads and which grew, by 1890, into a proper school with a hired teacher, Miss Eva Connolly from Elko, and 12 students. It was the work she had not known she was looking for. The work her father's household had prepared her for without her knowing. She organized, she corresponded. She argued with the County Board of Education with a precision and persistence that was, Catherine Briggs told her admiringly, absolutely terrifying to watch and entirely effective. Clement watched her work with the same steady, open admiration he had for everything she did, and when she came home from her meetings and her letter-writing campaigns tired and occasionally exasperated, he made coffee and listened and said exactly the right amount and let her talk. In 1888, a third child. Another son, born in December, named Thomas Clement Rourke, Thomas for the complicated, imperfect man who had died at 41, leaving behind a mess and a wall and a very long, honest last letter, and Clement because Ellen said simply that she wanted a child with his name in him. Thomas Clement was born loud and hungry and remained that way. He was 3 years old by the spring of 1891, and already clearly the ranch's primary chaos engine, which Patrick managed with fraternal gravity and Alice regarded as her personal province. The R-Bar stood in the Humboldt Valley through the seasons and the years. Stone walls and cottonwood trees, and the watercourse that ran cold and clear through the dry Nevada earth. And Clement Rourke and Ellen Langston Rourke lived their life inside it with the full, attentive, ordinary joy of two people who found each other by complete accident in a stopped town, and decided, against all reasonable logic, to trust what was real. On the evening of their 7th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch after the children were in bed, with the stars vast overhead and the night air carrying the particular clean cold of Nevada in November. Clement had a cup of coffee. Ellen had her book. She was not reading it. She was looking at the sky. He said, "What are you thinking?" She said, "I'm thinking about train delays." He made the sound that was almost a laugh. "Are you?" "I'm thinking," she said, "that if the track hadn't flooded, I would have been in San Francisco 3 days earlier and never seen Harding. And I would have sorted out Thomas's business and had my $6,000 and my fresh start and my reasonable, orderly new life." "And," he said. She looked at him. His face in the lamplight from the window, steady and warm and entirely hers. "And I would not have known," she said, "what I was missing." He reached over and took her hand. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she said, and the whole rest of everything. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to it, the gentle, deliberate kiss of a man who has not stopped being grateful, who carries the near miss of it as something permanent. "I love you, Ellen," he said. "I love you, Clement," she said. The stars moved over Nevada, vast and patient and entirely unmoved by the small human warmth on that porch, the lamplight and the joined hands and the sleeping children and the stone walls that held it all in place. And it was, in every way that mattered, more than anyone could have planned, more than anyone could have hoped, more than the ordinary shape of any reasonable life. It was what happened when a flood washed out the tracks and a woman found a letter and a quiet cattleman offered to share his fire, and two people chose to trust what was real. It was enough. It was everything.